I stood on the wet asphalt as Silas, the security guard who had smiled at me every single morning for 3 years, gripped my elbows. He marched me across the parking lot, like I was a common criminal caught stealing office supplies. Through the large glass windows of the second-floor break room, I could see them all. They were raising crystal flutes, laughing and clinking glasses around Nora Caldwell. The colorful balloons bobbed against the ceiling tiles, while my personal items sat pathetically in a damp cardboard box under my left arm. I caught the eye of Julian Croft, my manager of 3 years, as he lifted his glass higher in a theatrical toast to my replacement. His mouth formed words I could read clearly, even through the streaked window pane and the pouring rain. She will fix your mess. 3 years, 1,095 days of sleepless nights, skipped meals, and solving traffic equations, while they gradually eliminated my entire support team. 3 years of creating a system that would transform urban mobility forever. We are pursuing alternative methodologies, Julian had announced 30 minutes earlier, sliding an empty box across his glass desk. Someone with, shall we say, more conventional approaches. I did not plead or scream. I just nodded while something vital inside me crumpled like discarded draft paper. 3 years of my life, my brilliant ideas, and my sweat dismissed with corporate pleasantries. Silas, who used to joke about coffee with me, now avoided my eyes as he watched me toss my box into the passenger seat of my 10-year-old hatchback. Protocol, he mumbled, looking down at his boots. I sat in my car, watching the celebration through the rain-blurred windows. They had been grooming Nora for months, the rising star with credentials, who questioned my methods in every meeting. I turned the key, and my car sputtered to life. Conventional approaches was code for we do not understand your genius, so we are replacing you with someone more familiar. I had poured everything into that traffic system, and now someone else would claim it. My name is Clara Vance, and until 40 minutes ago, I was the lead engineer for one of the most ambitious traffic systems ever created. It was the invisible architecture that made sure emergency vehicles found clear paths, that rush hour flowed, and that a city of 2 million people could move like a living organism. I did not look the part of a brilliant engineer. At 32, with unruly auburn hair I rarely bothered to style, and a preference for comfort, I was easy to underestimate. My colleagues learned that my mind functioned differently, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. My apartment was dark when I arrived home. No pets, no plants, just the echo of my wet shoes on the floor. I had given everything to that job. My social life had withered. My dating applications gathered digital dust. My family had stopped expecting me at gatherings. It was not supposed to end this way. 6 months earlier, my project had received glowing reviews. City officials had marveled at the early simulations showing a 30% reduction in emergency response times. The mayor had said this could save lives, asking how I did it. I could not fully explain. The system worked because I spent 3 years learning invisible patterns, adjusting for weather, crowd psychology, and historical data anomalies. I coded my intuition into the system, making thousands of micro-adjustments daily. Then Julian Croft hired Nora Caldwell, just to lighten your workload, he had assured me with that thin smile. The board wants additional perspectives. Nora with her crisp blazers and flawless slideshows. Nora who had theories about everything but had built nothing. Nora who gradually appeared in meetings to which I had received no invitation, who somehow had access to my preliminary designs, who smiled when I worked late, telling me to take care of myself while cataloging my insights. The first night after my dismissal, my phone remained silent. The second day, too. They were celebrating their brilliant decision. The heart of their operation, my creation, was now in Nora's hands. I sat on my balconies that second night, watching the city lights flicker. 3 years of my life, erased with corporate platitudes and a cheap toast to my replacement. I had been a fool to believe my brilliance would protect me, that creating something irreplaceable would make me irreplaceable. Sleep evaded me. I paced my apartment like a ghost, touching books I never had time to read, opening cupboards filled with quick meals. Who was I without my work? What remained of Clara when the project that consumed her was taken away? I looked out at the streetlights, wondering if the algorithms were already struggling under the weight of real-world traffic. The system was a delicate ecosystem. and Nora believed it was just a series of standard lines of code. She would soon find out that you cannot run a city with textbook rules. I poured a glass of water and tried to force myself to breathe. The anger was there, but beneath it was a profound sense of loss. I had built a masterpiece, and they had handed the keys to someone who only knew how to drive on straight lines. I finally went to bed as dawn began to break, my mind spinning with equations I no longer had the right to solve. The calling began on the third morning. I was making bitter black coffee, watching the steam curl against the cold glass of the room window, when my phone vibrated on the counter. Nora Caldwell's name flashed across the screen. I did not move. I simply stood there, cup in hand, and watched it ring until it went to voicemail. I did not check the message. 3 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. By noon, I had counted 7 missed calls from Nora. By 5 in the afternoon, the count had reached 12. No text messages, no professional emails, just a quiet, persistent drumming of missed calls that spoke of a growing panic behind the glass walls of the corporate office. At midnight, as I sat on my living room rug surrounded by my old handwritten notebooks, the 19th call came through. The phone buzzed against the wood, a glowing insect in the dark. I did not answer. Let them enjoy their conventional approaches. On the 4th morning, I woke up to find 27 missed calls. I made breakfast, enjoying the slow pace of a day with no immediate deadlines, no stressful team meetings, and no corporate performance reviews. My phone rang again. This time it was not Nora but Maya, the only junior engineer who had survived the restructuring 6 months ago. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was a hushed whisper, trembling with nervous energy. "Clara," she said, "it is falling apart. The entire North Quadrant gridlocked yesterday afternoon. The sensors are failing to adjust, and the timing loops are completely stuck." Maya explained that ambulances could not get through the central corridors. The city had to dispatch emergency helicopters for 3 separate medical incidents because the roads were completely blocked. I said nothing, listening to her shallow breathing. Nora keeps trying to recalibrate using standard parameters. Maya continued, but it is only making the backup worse. Julian is losing his mind. The mayor called him twice this morning, demanding to know why the system we promised is failing. That sounds challenging, I replied, keeping my voice entirely flat and calm. Challenging? Clara, it is an absolute disaster. The board is calling an emergency meeting, and the city is threatening to cancel the entire contract. Maya paused, her voice dropping lower. They need you. No, I corrected the junior engineer. They fired me. They marched me out of the building while they toasted my replacement. They do not need me. They are just experiencing the logical consequences of their own actions. Clara, please, Maya pleaded. Real people are sitting in gridlock. Emergency services are blocked. That comment pinched my conscience. Real people were suffering, not just Julian with his theatrical toasts, or Nora with her stolen designs. But I could not just run back and fix it for them. I have to go, Maya, I said, and ended the call. An hour later, my doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Julian Croft stood on my landing. The immaculate executive who always wore bespoke suits looked completely disheveled. His silver hair was messy, his silk tie was loosened, and dark circles sagged under his eyes. Clara, he said as I opened the door, attempting an ingratiating smile that looked more like a grimace. May I come in? I stood firmly in the doorway, blocking his path. Why? I asked. We need to talk professionally, he said, shifting his weight. I do not work for you, Julian. Remember the security guard, the box of wet papers, the toast to my replacement? He winced, looking down the carpeted hallway. That was an unfortunate misunderstanding. We were under immense pressure from the board. Look, we are facing some technical integration issues with the rollout. Nora is brilliant, but she is encountering some unexpected variables in your code. I leaned against the door frame. My mess, you mean? Isn't that what you called it? His smile vanished, replaced by a desperate intensity. I never said that. I read your lips, Julian. I spent 3 years watching you talk over me in meetings, so I got very good at reading what you say when you think no one is listening. He straightened his shoulders, trying to project authority. The city is in chaos. Emergency services are compromised. This is bigger than our personal differences, I agreed. It sounds like a perfect opportunity for Nora to showcase the conventional methods that you were so eager to implement. Clara, Please, he said, his voice cracking slightly. We are prepared to offer you a consulting agreement, triple your old hourly rate. Just help us stabilize the system and walk Nora through the architecture. I looked at the man who had dismissed 3 years of my work, who had watched me get escorted out like a criminal. No, I said simply. Just like that? He stammered. Just like that, I replied. The same way you handed me an empty box. His face hardened, the desperation turning to anger. This is not about your pride. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I will tell the board you sabotaged the system before you left. I smiled. Go ahead. Tell them you fired the only person who understands the architecture without securing a transition. I am sure they will love your leadership. The color drained from his face and I closed the door. He stood on my doorstep for another 5 minutes, muttering to himself, before I finally heard his heavy footsteps fading down the stairs. I went back to my lukewarm coffee, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The battle was joined, and I was holding all the high ground. I spent the afternoon walking through the downtown core, observing the physical collapse of my work. The city was in a tight chokehold. Traffic lights changed in nonsensical sequences, holding green lights for empty streets while main arteries backed up for miles. Horns blared in a deafening, continuous chorus of frustration that vibrated through the concrete buildings. At one busy crossing, I watched an elderly woman wait 7 minutes for a pedestrian walk signal that never came. The air was thick with exhaust fumes as idling engines sat motionless. Local news vans were parked near City Hall, reporters speaking to cameras about the grid crisis on day 5. I felt a deep ache in my chest. This was my creation, meant to bring order and safety, reduced to a source of public misery. That evening, a message arrived from an unknown number. It was an address, a time, and a few words. Please for the city. Mayor Audrey. I arrived at the small cafe the next morning. The mayor looked exhausted, lines of strain etched deep around her eyes. She stood as I approached. Thank you for coming, Clara, she said, gesturing to a corner table. I sat down and wrapped my hands around a hot mug of tea. I have not agreed to anything, I reminded the mayor. I know, she said, but you are here because you care. Your former employer is recommending they scrap your entire system and revert to the old setup. I winced. That would be a massive waste of public resources and years of development. It would be a disaster, the mayor corrected. Emergency response times are up 40%. We have had 2 traffic incidents where delayed response times contributed to serious injuries. The city cannot function like this. I leaned back in the creaking cafe chair, watching the steam rise from my tea. The mayor was right about the city, but she was also a politician who knew how to push the right buttons. I knew the contract between my former company and the city inside out. I had spent weeks reviewing its clauses to ensure my compliance audits were clean. If the company is in material breach, I said, then the city has the legal right to terminate. But what about the source code itself? The company will claim ownership under the original developer agreement. The mayor shook her head. Our legal counsel discovered that they failed to file the necessary intellectual property declarations with the city registration office. Their claim is incredibly weak. We can declare the license terms void ab initio because they never delivered the operational stability required by the performance clauses. I took a slow sip. It was a solid legal strategy. I would not just be helping the city. I would be taking back my own work under a completely independent agreement, leaving Julian Croft with an empty shell of a contract. The mayor leaned forward, her expression earnest. I was shocked to hear you had left the project. They told us you had accepted another opportunity. They lied, I said. They fired me to install someone with a prestigious degree who promised conventional predictability. They threw a welcome party for her while security marched me out. The mayor shook her head. They were foolish, but now 2 million people are suffering. I know you want to teach them a lesson, but the city should not pay the price. I stared into my tea. I can hire you directly as a principal municipal consultant, the mayor proposed. We will bypass the company entirely, taking over the physical operations. I sat back, calculating. I would need complete creative control, I said. My name on all patents, research papers, and software architecture documents, and I choose my team. The mayor did not blink. Done. I will have the legal team draft the consulting agreement by this evening. We will provide you with all necessary resources, including direct access to the Municipal Traffic Control Center. You will not have to deal with Julian or his corporate board ever again. As I walked home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya. Emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Nora is telling everyone she found evidence of deliberate sabotage in your code. She says you left logical traps. I laughed out loud, attracting curious glances from pedestrians. Sabotage. The ultimate excuse for someone who cannot read a map. Nora could not understand the adaptive variables, so she assumed I had broken the system on purpose. It was a common corporate defense mechanism. If you cannot understand the brilliance of a system, accuse the creator of sabotage. I replied to Maya, telling her to stay calm. I had spent 3 years ensuring every line of code was documented, even if Nora lacked the intellect to interpret the metadata. I spent the rest of the evening organizing my notes, preparing my laptop, and reviewing the original database configurations. I logged into my private offline development server, checked the telemetry logs, and noticed that Nora had applied the standard textbook smoothing algorithm, which completely broke the emergency routing. It was painful to watch how a single misunderstanding of my variables had caused such a massive gridlock. But I decided to wait. I needed to see what Nora and Julian would do next. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days, knowing that the trap Julian and Nora had built for me was about to snap shut on their own fingers. Nora Caldwell called me later that night. I answered on the third ring. "Clara," she said, her voice tight and trembling with suppressed panic. "We need to talk." I leaned back on my sofa, listening to the hum of the city outside my window. "What is on your mind, Nora?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "You know exactly what," she snapped. "I have been going through your source code, the undocumented variables, the irregular feedback loops, the timing parameters that do not match any standard textbook model. You intentionally set me up to fail. You sabotaged the city system." I laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Sabotage?" "Nora, every single calculation is based on real-world observations. Did you think a living city would behave like a clean classroom simulation?" I listened to the desperate tone in Nora's voice. It was a stark contrast to the confident, almost dismissive attitude she had shown during our meetings over the past few months. "You were so sure of yourself when Julian was introducing you to the board," I reminded my successor. "You nodded along when he talked about standardizing the system." "I thought the system was built on standard principles," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I did not realize you had coded your own intuition into the loops. I did not realize the North Quadrant reacted so violently to minor timing changes." "I told you that, Nora. I told you during the transition meetings, but you were too busy taking notes on how to present it to the executives. You did not listen to the actual technical details." "I know," she whispered. "I was trying to impress them. I wanted to prove I could handle a project of this scale. But Julian is a snake. He is already preparing a formal report for the board that blames me for mismanaging the database transition. He is going to fire me tomorrow if I cannot get the North Quadrant running tonight." "You left no documentation for the adaptive matrices," she accused. "I left meticulous logs," I countered. "You just do not know how to read them because they do not fit into your rigid frameworks." There was a silence on the line. I could hear her ragged breathing. Finally, her voice softened, losing its corporate edge. "Clara, please, I need your help. I cannot stabilize the grid. The board is meeting tomorrow, and Julian is planning to blame the entire failure on me. He is going to claim I mismanaged the transition." I took a slow sip of water. "A week ago, you were smiling at a party thrown to celebrate my exit. You told Julian you would fix my mess." "I did not know they were going to fire you," she whispered. "But you knew they were pushing me out, and you happily took the credit," I said. The silence stretched. "People are suffering, Clara," she said quietly, using the same moral argument the mayor had presented. "Whatever you think of me, the city does not deserve this." I closed my eyes, thinking. "I will meet with you," I said. "Not at the office. The public library, main branch, third-floor study room, 10 tomorrow morning. Do not bring a laptop or a tablet. Just yourself and a pen." I hung up. The next morning, I walked into the quiet library. Nora was already there, looking exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed. I set my notebook on the table. "Let us be clear," I said. "I am not here to save your job or protect your career." "I understand," she said, looking down. I pulled a blank sheet of paper from my notebook and drew a simple diagram of the North Quadrant intersection. "Look at this," I said, pointing my pen at the drawing. Nora leaned forward, her eyes scanning the lines. "You are trying to smooth the traffic flow using a standard green time formula. But the drivers in the North Quadrant are not standard. On rainy days, the pedestrian count near the shopping transit nodes increases by 40% as people try to avoid walking in the wet weather. This creates localized bottlenecks that block the right turn lanes. Your textbook formula does not account for pedestrian volume spikes based on weather data. It assumes a static flow. You have to write an adaptive loop that pulls live weather telemetry and adjusts the pedestrian cycle accordingly." She stared at the drawing, a look of sudden realization washing over her face. "It makes sense," she whispered, "but how did you code that without standard libraries?" "I wrote my own libraries," I said. "I spent 2 years mapping local driver psychology and pedestrian habits. That is what you called a mess." "Now you have a decision to make," I said. "Julian is going to present his report to the board, blaming my design. If you agree to tell the truth, we can resolve this." Nora looked up, fear and resolve battling on her face. "What truth? That you tried to apply textbook formulas to a system you did not understand, and that Julian forced you to override my protocols to meet an artificial deadline," I said. "If you confess that to the board, I will help you stabilize the grid. If you lie to protect Julian, I will let the system freeze, and the city will terminate the contract under terms that are void ab initio." "Julian will ruin my reputation," she whispered. "He is going to ruin it anyway," I pointed out. "At least this way, you walk out with your integrity." She stared at her pen for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I will do it. I will tell them everything, even if it means losing my position. I just want this nightmare to end. I am tired of being Julian's shield." The board meeting was set for 10 in the morning. I dressed in a charcoal suit and wore my mother's pearl earrings. I arrived at the corporate offices early, sitting in the waiting area outside the boardroom. Through the glass doors, I could see Julian Croft presenting slides, gesturing grandly as he blamed my experimental methodology for the traffic crisis. Nora Caldwell sat beside him, staring at the table. At 10:30, the boardroom doors opened, and the chairman called me in. "Clara," he said, "we are facing a critical situation. Julian suggests your code has hidden flaws that cause this crisis." I stood at the end of the table. "My code is flawless," I said. "Julian's hand-picked successor simply did not understand how to operate it." The tension in the waiting area was palpable. Through the glass, I could see the board members sit in their high-backed leather chairs, their faces grim as they looked at the performance charts. Julian Croft was in his element, pacing at the front of the room, using a red laser pointer to highlight the drop in system efficiency. He was painting a picture of engineering failure, claiming my experimental design was a ticking bomb that had finally exploded under Nora's watch. He was trying to protect himself by throwing both me and Nora under the bus, hoping the board would approve a massive budget for a complete rebuild under his direction. It was a classic corporate play. Create a crisis, blame the departed expert, and demand more funding to fix it. Julian sneered. "Your documentation was insufficient, Clara. It was a mess." Before I could reply, Nora stood up. "No, it was not," she said, her voice clear and resonant. The board turned to look at her in shock. "Nora," Julian warned, his face turning red. Nora ignored him. "Clara's system is brilliant. It failed because I tried to force standard templates onto an adaptive architecture, and because Julian ordered me to override the safety protocols to make the rollout look faster. He knew the system was not ready, but he wanted to impress the board." The room erupted in murmurs. Julian sputtered, trying to defend himself, but the chairman silenced him with a wave of his hand. I watched Julian's face transition from confident authority to absolute shock as Nora kept speaking. She did not just admit her own mistakes. She detailed how Julian had pressured her to ignore my warnings. "He told me the board only cared about the quarterly launch deadline," Nora said, her voice growing stronger. "He said we could fix the database bugs later. When the system began to fail, he ordered me to hide the telemetry reports from the city engineers. He wanted to blame Clara all along." The board chairman leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Is this true, Julian?" Julian stammered, his face turning an angry shade of purple as he pointed an accusing finger at Nora. "She is lying. She is trying to cover for her own incompetence. But Nora calmly pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket and slid it across the table. These are the email logs, she said. The direct instructions from Julian. That was when the side door opened and Mayor Audrey entered, accompanied by her legal counsel. Gentlemen, the mayor said, the city is officially invoking its right to terminate our agreement. Your company is in material breach of contract, making our licensing agreement void ab initio due to the non-functional infrastructure. We are engaging Clara Vance directly as our principal municipal consultant. Furthermore, we are notifying the regulatory authorities regarding a breach of fiduciary duty by Julian Croft, who dissipated company assets by removing the key engineer. The board members looked shell-shocked. The chairman turned to me. Clara, please, is there no way to work together? I looked at Julian, then at the chairman. I will stabilize the system, I said, but under my own terms. The mayor's legal counsel stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. Under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106, Clara Vance holds the exclusive copyright to the proprietary enhancements she developed independently outside her standard contract hours, the counsel explained. Your company has no legal right to use, modify, or distribute those updates. Furthermore, by removing the only qualified engineer and failing to maintain functional code, Julian Croft has engaged in a clear breach of fiduciary duty to the company, leading to the direct dissipation of your primary municipal assets. The licensing agreement is officially terminated, void ab initio. The chairman looked at Julian with utter contempt. The board had realized they were facing a federal lawsuit, a city contract termination, and a massive public relations disaster. I am taking Maya and the core development team with me to the new municipal division, I continued. The chairman winced but nodded. They had no choice. Within 72 hours, my team and I stabilized the city grid. The traffic lights resumed their natural rhythm, emergency vehicles found clear corridors, and the gridlock cleared. The city flowed once more, a breathing, moving organism. The mayor held a press conference, announcing my new role in the restoration of the traffic grid. 1 month later, I walked past the old corporate headquarters on my way to the mayor's office. Through the glass lobby, I could see employees packing boxes. The loss of the municipal contract had devastated their revenue, forcing them to dissolve the division. Julian Croft had been removed by the board, facing lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty. Near the glass doors, Julian stood with a cardboard box of his own, looking shell-shocked as he watched his career crumble. I did not stop or gloat. I simply adjusted my coat and kept walking toward the city hall, where Maya and my new team were waiting. True success is not about destroying your enemies. It is about building something so strong that their attempts to tear you down only end up burying them.